He crossed centuries and star fields, but the one journey that remade him began with a human and a cup of tea. He never meant to love her. He never meant to lose her. Tonight, he finally tells the truth. The Axion consul left the ballroom without a word, slipping from chandeliers and crystal laughter into the quiet of a side corridor where music became a memory. In the hush of the palace, he found a small salon washed in amber light. His nephew, young, sharp-eyed, uniform slightly askew from dancing, lifted a hand in greeting. "Leaving early, uncle?" "Just catching my breath," the consul said, settling into a chair across from him. The nephew poured a steaming drink from a delicate glass pot. "You'll like this." "New shipment." The consul raised the cup, intending only a polite sip, and stopped. The scent breached centuries, warm as sunrise on a cold station, crisp as mountain dawn. He blinked. Suddenly older. "That fragrance," he murmured. "I thought I'd forgotten it." "Darreling leaf," the nephew said, proud. "Humans' favorite. First harvest of the season." The consul's smile wavered. "Yes, humans." Silence balanced between them like a coin on its edge. The nephew, sensing something fragile, set his cup down. "Uncle, what is it?" The consul looked at the door to the ballroom where music still curled and faded. "For most of my life I've been careful with what I share and when, but I have carried a story alone for far too long." He exhaled, the breath almost a confession. "If I speak it, promise me you'll listen the way a navigator watches the stars, without interruption and with care." The nephew sat straighter. "I'm listening." "Before diplomacy, before councils and ceremonies," the consul said, "I ran. At 62, barely grown by our measure, I left my clan and their careful plans. I wanted the feeling of an open airlock and a vector I controlled. I chased famous stations and polished worlds, but purpose never lived where brochures told me to look." He stared into steam as if it were a map. Eventually, drifting through quiet lanes no trade beacon bothered to mark, I reached a blue planet the charts called Earth. He smiled, small and unguarded. "I could fill 100 nights with Earth, but that isn't the chapter you need. What matters is a person named Lucy." He took another sip as though bracing himself. I was in a street-side cafe with thin chairs and a too loud door chime. I must have looked like a ghost someone forgot to dismiss. Eyes hollow, posture surrendered. Then a human woman sat beside me without asking, bumped my shoulder as if to wake me, and said, "We're sharing this table. You look like you need a drink that knows your name." He laughed under his breath. She ordered tea, not something corrosive or celebratory, tea with seriousness, as if warmth itself were a ritual. She spoke like an engineer solving a problem gently, and she listened like a horizon, wide enough to hold storms without breaking. "For a week," he went on. "At the same hour, we met at that same table. We traded failures like artifacts. I told her what it means to be Axion and feel nothing fitting. She told me about a family that wanted a lawyer while she wanted the sky. She had a degree in astrophysics and no ship, a heart full of orbits and no trajectory." He looked to his nephew. "Two runaways. One with funds and no purpose. One with purpose and no funds. What happened next?" The nephew asked softly. "I asked her to come with me," the consul said simply. "No vows. No promises beyond. Let's go see the parts of the map that haven't learned their names." She said yes without blinking. He breathed, and the room seemed to widen. "We bought a modest vessel. I wanted a hunter's name for her, Voidbreaker, Starcutter, something that made noise. Lucy said, 'We're not here to break. We're here to witness.' She called the ship Voyager, in honor of an old human machine that once whispered to the dark. We rebuilt her from spine to skin," he said, voice warming. "Sensors nested around the hull like barn swallows. A lab where cargo used to sleep. A library of star catalogs that blinked when we entered new space. We learned the patience of slow orbits and the thrill of arriving somewhere charts turned vague." He chuckled. "We tried to hire crewmates now and then. Brilliant misfits with temporary loyalties, but most of the time it was just us. 40 years threaded like a garland across the Milky Way. Dust lanes, red dwarfs, rainstorms on moons with copper deserts. We watched a comet shed its skin into a ring. We listened to the auroras of a gas giant like a cathedral made of wind." His gaze drifted far past the salon walls. "It was Lucy who taught me how to love the work, not just the result. To sharpen questions until they hummed. To measure without stripping wonder away. She didn't wrestle the universe. She coaxed it to speak. The nephew hesitated, then braved the next line of logic. But humans, they don't live long. The consul's hands tightened around the cup. No, they don't. He set the cup down, careful, as if placing something living back in its nest. Docked at an outpost one morning, I woke to quiet where there should have been kettle and laughter. The berth was empty. The Voyager was gone. At my bedside, a sachet of tea. On it, one word, sorry. Even the music down the corridor seemed to pause. I bought a new ship, he said, voice low, fast as a dare. I chased ion smears, rumors, footprints, and station logs that always faded just as I reached them. I crossed nights so long the stars felt like frost on the window. 10 years became 20. He looked at his nephew, and the centuries inside his eyes were visible. At the far shock of the Orion arm, I found the Voyager adrift, powerless, cockpit windows facing the galaxy as if it were a friend she meant to remember. He swallowed. On the main console waited a message. He didn't mimic her voice. He didn't need to. Every word arrived like a bead of light. I didn't want to make you watch me fold into time. The message said, you have centuries of sky. I had decades. That's not a tragedy. It's a scale. Thank you for the years you shared. I'm leaving you our work, every log, every map. Don't follow. My last walk is mine. I'm going to look at the stars the way we promised we would until I'm only light. The console let the quiet answer. The nephew realized his cigarette had burned to ash between his fingers. He put it out quickly, embarrassed by the clumsy human habit he'd picked up from academy friends, and didn't apologize. He knew better than to talk over grief that had learned how to stand. What did you do? He asked finally. I brought her home, the console said. Humans don't leave their dead unacknowledged. Memory is a duty there. I couldn't return her, but I could return what she loved and what we built. I took the Voyager back to Earth, along with everything we recorded. I met her sister, older, alive, surprised into tears by a ghost in an Axion doorway. I learned that Lucy's parents forgave her long before their last year. They waited, door unlatched, for the knock that never came. He breathed out a sound that might have been a prayer if Axions had those. I arranged a ceremony that made sense to both species. We placed her name in a ring of light and returned a handful of meteor dust to a river she had loved. A scientist from their academy read a passage about wandering machines that became artifacts. A child pointed at our ship and asked whether it was sad. Someone laughed softly and said, maybe. He sat back, the telling having rearranged his posture as if speaking had adjusted his center of gravity. Then I did the only honest thing left. I opened the logs and started again. Exploration wasn't hers alone, and it wasn't mine alone. It was what the two of us made together, and it was larger than either. I let the work carry me forward. The nephew studied him. You disappeared for a century after that. I did, the console admitted. Stars require patience, and so does healing. They both looked at the pot, now half empty, in the room's soft light. Beyond the door, applause rose and faded, the waltz changing to something livelier. Will you tell the community? The nephew asked. About Lucy, about Voyager. Yes. The consul's voice was firm now. A ship deserves to rest where her story began. I'll return Voyager and the full archive to the humans. She never wanted attention. But time is a kind of silence that curdles if you never speak into it. Her work should stand where others can build upon it. That is what she taught me. Leave the door open for whoever comes next. The nephew nodded, struck by a sudden, earnest curiosity. One last question, Uncle. Is she the reason you never married? The consul lifted his cup and hid a smile in the steam. Let's say I found my constellation early. You spend your life following it. There isn't much room after that for pretending another sky would feel right. He took the last sip, savoring the afterglow, and set the cup down as if closing a chapter. In the crystal saucer, the reflection of the salon lights looked for a moment like a tiny spiral galaxy. Come, he said, standing. They'll send a search party if we don't return. And I have an announcement to draft. One that delivers a ship named Voyager back to a world that taught me how to listen. They stepped into the corridor. Music brightened. The consul paused, glanced back at the quiet room, and touched 2 fingers to the table where the pot still warmed the air. Thank you, he whispered, to the tea, to the memory, to the woman who had turned a runaway into a discoverer, and then he walked on.